So today we are talking about tone color, unpacking all the different aspects of it, or at least all the ones that I can think of, and figuring out what terms we can use if you're doing your HSC exams and you've got a question about tone color. Let's hook into it. Tone color, or timbre as you might have also heard it called, is the type of sound, the production of sound, and the different qualities of sound that you hear in a song. There's quite a lot of different terms and ideas to unpack in tone color. The first thing that we're going to look at is how to classify different instruments. You can define them using the Hornbostel-Sachs system, which has chordophones, instruments that make sound from a vibrating string. The string could be plucked, hammered, bowed, so think cellos, violins, double basses, guitars, pianos, all that sort of stuff. Idiophones, which produce sound from the vibration of the actual body of the instrument itself, think maracas or xylophones. Membranophones produce sound from a vibrating membrane, so think drums or timpani. Aerophones have sound from a vibrating column of air, so flutes, recorders, trumpets, bagpipes. And finally, electrophones, which produce sound using electronic components or with the help of electronic components. So you might have synthesizers, theremin, that sort of stuff. You can also define instruments using more Western traditional ideas. So string family. A lot of chordophones fall into that string category there. Aerophones are split between woodwind and brass, so they're two separate categories. Woodwind instruments make sound from a vibrating reed or a column of air against the edge of an instrument, while brass instruments need the vibration of the musician's lips against the mouthpiece of the instrument. We have the percussion family, which includes most idiophones and membranophones, so these are instruments that make a sound when we hit them. And percussion instruments are split again into either pitched percussion or unpitched percussion, depending on if they can create specific pitches as they go. So for example, pitched percussion would have xylophones, marimbas, pianos in there because the sound is generated by hammering, right? But we can create specific pitches with what notes we're playing, while unpitched percussion don't make those sort of same specific pitches as you go. Some people add a category for keyboard instruments in here, but I tend to avoid that, as do many other people, and instead categorize keyboard instruments as if you are generating the sound through hammering, like on a piano, something like that, they go into percussion. If the sound is generated from plucked strings, that would go into string. If you're generating the sound electronically, they'd be classified as electronic instruments. Yeah, that's where we'd go from there. We'd round out this category system with electronic instruments. So again, same with electrophones, any instruments that create sound electronically or using the help of electronic components. The other thing to think about when you're analysing the instruments and sounds that you can hear in a piece of music is what roles are those instruments playing? So typically we would expect something like a bass instrument to be playing low, pitched notes at the bottom of the register of the overall song, right? And then a melody played by a higher instrument, further up, say something like a voice or a synthesizer, whatever you've got, a violin, whatever happens to be playing the melody in the excerpt that you're listening to. But if those roles are reversed, and suddenly you have an instrument doing something that you would not expect, like for example, if you've got a bass that is playing the melody, it has a completely different quality to the sound and implication for the piece than if you have the melody played by a xylophone or a glockenspiel. So it's important to think about what roles your instruments are playing, what impact those roles have, and how that changes the timbre, tone color, quality, vibe, whatever, aesthetic of the piece. How does it change it, and what implication does that have? The next thing we can look at is type of ensemble playing the music. There are quite a few different options here. Some of the Western art music traditions would include a medieval ensemble, Renaissance ensemble, a Baroque orchestra, a classical orchestra, a romantic orchestra, a modern orchestra, a film orchestra. Now, each of those have very different qualities. If you are keen to unpack all of those, just Google it, have a look at it for yourself. If I sit here and very specifically go through all of that, it's going to take me a long time. That being said, if there are enough people that would like me to go through and clarify the sound for all of those different types of things, let me know, and I will do that for you. But I'm not going to do it right here. I'm just trying to give you a brief overview of all the different things to keep an eye out for. Anyway, those are the Western art music ensemble types that you can expect to hear. Then you have different band types. So you might have a pop band, a jazz group. This could either be like a smaller jazz ensemble, a duo, a trio, a small jazz band, or a big band. There's also marching bands or concert bands. You might have an excerpt with a solo performer, or you might have a duo or a trio. We mentioned it before in terms of jazz group, but it might be a non-jazz band, but you've still got a duo or a trio playing. There's also choirs or a cappella groups, so vocal ensembles, either small or large. You can also call these choruses. If you're unsure of exactly how large the ensemble is, then just be as detailed as you can. So if it sounds like there's multiple voices and they seem female, then you can put female choir or female chorus, just whatever you can figure out. It's also worth saying if we've got any atypical use of instruments in here. That definitely changes the tone color or timbre as well. So if you've got somebody whacking the strings on a double bass, that's going to sound completely different to if they are using a bow to play those same strings. If you've got somebody using a pencil and running it along the strings of a piano inside the body of it, that's going to sound completely different to if they're running their fingers along the notes. Even though they're doing basically the same movement, it is a completely different result, a completely different quality of sound that you're ending up with. So try and keep an ear out for that, and if something sounds unexpected, make note of it and describe it as best you can. You might also get unexpected groupings of instruments. So say if you've got a synthesizer ensemble and then you've got somebody playing a Turkish oud over it, that would be worth noting as a fairly unique tone color of the overall song. I'm going to take you through some of the core descriptive terms that you can use when you're listening to describe the timbre or tone color of a piece. I'm going to try to change the background music here to fit with the timbre I'm talking about so you can hear the difference. We'll see how we go. Let's give it a whirl. There's more terms than about what I'm about to go through here, but these are just some of the main ones that you can use. If you've got something dry, it's going to sound really short, succinct, not very much reverberation or echo on it. You may have something woody, so that typically refers to instruments that sound like they might be made of wood. So think of a marimba or a wood block. Those would be a woody sound. It's often warm and woody typically go together. In that same descriptive sense, you might have something hollow. So a wood block, for example, is something that sounds woody and hollow. You can hear that there is a space inside the instrument that you're hitting. It sounds hollow. The timbre is hollow and woody. In that same idea of describing what the instrument is made out of, you might have something that sounds metallic. So that would obviously be something that sounds made out of metal. These sort of metallic sounds often sound a bit colder than the warmer, woodier tones. You might even describe those metallic sounds as icy or cold, or perhaps you've got a sound that sounds icy but doesn't sound metallic. That's also fine. You can describe things as icy, cold, warm, whatever you think. You might have something that sounds mellow, so something more gentle and flowing, relaxed, that sort of sound for mellow. You might have something that sounds bright and poppy. This could be a brass ensemble, high strings. Bright is often higher pitched instruments. You don't typically get a bass line that you'd describe as bright, but that being said, you can kind of have anything of anything, and it's important to describe it if you've got something weird. Maybe there is a bass line that sounds bright, and if you do find that, point it out as an unexpected use of that instrument. And opposing bright, we might have dull, instruments that sound muted or reserved. This could be, for example, an instrument using a physical mute, so perhaps a muted trumpet or a palm muted guitar. But it may also be that the sound has been dulled using production. So if you've got a sound like this, and then you take away the high frequencies, it shifts it, and then suddenly it comes across as much more dull. You may have something that sounds quite grating, tough to listen to. Think fingernails on a blackboard. That is bad to even just think about. That would be grating. You may have something shrill. So shrill is often high pitched. Again, harsh to listen to, piercing, shrill, those sort of descriptors. You might have something breathy. So if you've got perhaps a vocal part that is fairly high up, it's sung really gently and using a lot of breath and air with the vocal delivery, that would come across as quite breathy. Or you may have something that sounds airy without being breathy. So for example, you may have a synthesizer or a woodwind part that is soft, gentle, airy, feels light, but doesn't necessarily seem breathy, but does feel airy. This part of tone color can be fairly subjective, so that's why it is important to try and be as specific as you can with your descriptors. So if you're saying that something is breathy, you need to say why it is breathy. So is it breathy because the singer is using a lot of air, singing softly, singing high, actually has active breath sounds in the recording? You can classify all of that as breathy. If you've got something that sounds dull, be specific. Why does it sound dull? Does it sound like the frequencies are being squashed? Does it sound like they're using a mute? All that sort of stuff you want to try and go into detail with. If you can't, don't stress. Just say what you think it sounds like, but the main thing I'm trying to say here is be descriptive. Don't shy away from describing what you're hearing, even if you think it may seem silly, the way that you're describing it. Don't worry about it, just describe it. Put it out there, put it on the page. They're not going to mind. And if it's totally and completely ridiculous, you'll probably give the marker a chuckle anyway. That is all there is for tone color and timbre. It is a bit of a beastie of a topic, and again, it's often used as a double barrel question, so perhaps it gets paired with expressive techniques. That's a classic thing, to have expressive techniques, the way an instrument is being manipulated or played, changing the tone color of the instrument. So like we said before, if you have a double bass that is being hit on the strings, that's an expressive technique that is changing the way that that instrument sounds on the recording. So just have a think about it. Try to focus in on what you're listening to, identify the different parts, and do your best to describe them. Let me know if you've got any questions or you need any more information, and I'll see you next time.